to press record, and we're also going to go live on Facebook. So we're going to say hello to all those folks who are joining us out there. Just a second. Okay. So the 4th Street Bridge Park, for a lot of you who've been following Motor Cities National Heritage over the last several years, you have heard a lot about our efforts to create a park at the confluence of Oakwood Boulevard and 4th Street in between Detroit and Dearborn. It's a bridge that crosses over between those two. You can see the bridge sort of right in the corner of this picture. And the park would endeavor to tell a number of stories in a space that represents so much history, not just automotive and labor, which I'll get to, but also community and environmental and a lot of other factors. So today's discussion is really going to focus on how those stories intersect there, and not just the physicality of the park, but the stories that we're trying to tell and interpret there. It was originally called the 4th Street Bridge Interpretive Park. We just sort of slightly shortened it. And before we get started, I would say that if it were not for the Michigan Department of Transportation, this would most likely have been a parking lot. It's the Michigan Department of Transportation who was actually rebuilding the bridge that you see off in the corner from its historical nature of 1920s Bastille drawbridge to a beautiful engineering marvel in and of itself. But they made the decision along the way to allow this group of community supporters to create something even more special there, which is this park that we're going to talk about today. So if it was not for their vision, we would not have the park that we see here today and the stories that we're going to tell. They thought that it was important enough to make sure those stories were told and that we did not lose them through the sands of time. So today you're going to hear again from a group of panelists that you're probably seeing on the screen, but each one of them represents such an important part of the stories that we're going to tell here. So each one of them will sort of take off a chunk of it and walk you through what it meant as we pulled all of this together. Remind us that again, if we have any questions, the Q&A function is available to all of you. So I'd love to see you put the questions in the Q&A. And then as we go along, I may, in between the panelists, maybe ask the question as we go through or save them till the end, depends on what they are. But I believe me, you will be piqued, your interest will be piqued on some of the processes we went through. So feel free to ask questions as you go along. And again, this is an aerial shot of the park as it stands today, as it has been opened. And so as many great stories, you skip to the end, but we're going to go back to the beginning. But this was an exciting time for all of us to finally see this come to fruition. And again, for those who have heard these stories many times, to arrive at this date where we're cutting the ribbon to open a park was an amazing odyssey, an amazing journey. But again, we're not going to skip to the end just yet, but just keep that image in your mind. The celebration came, but it was after many years of hard work and laboring on behalf of this group who brought it all together. Many supporters, too many to list here, but certainly major funders that came along, volunteers and people who gave so much of themselves. But it was all rooted in this partnership that was created many years ago. And I'm going to invite our first panelist in, Dr. Paul Draus from the University of Michigan-Dearborn, to talk to us about the Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership, and then kind of walk us through how we got from the creation of that partnership, Paul, to its role in developing this park. So, Paul, you are muted. There we go.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for hosting this event, and welcome the opportunity to tell the story of the 4th Street Bridge Park. I'm going to tell my part of the story, and then each of us is going to contribute a little bit. And for me, they say that a picture tells 1,000 words, and in that sense, maybe a map tells more than is worth more than 1,000 words. So I chose a couple of maps to sort of lay the foundation for this story. This is one which is a kind of a map illustration, and you'll get to meet one of the individuals responsible for this later on in the presentation today. But this is really a depiction of the Rouge River corridor from the University of Michigan-Dearborn, which is up there on the kind of what's my left-hand corner. I don't know if you can show that with the pointer, Brian, following the Rouge River all the way down to the Detroit River there, and you can see Zug Island at the bottom. This was a part of something called the Rouge Gateway Master Plan, which was really a kind of a visionary planning project that was, begun and completed. Actually, there are several phases of it before I ever became involved with this project. But as a professor at the University of Michigan-Dearborn around 2010, I had only started at the university 5 years prior to that. I had become aware of this project through an administrator at our university whose name was Ed Begale, who was one of the kind of the central figures in leading the Rouge Gateway Master Plan. But then there was another map, we can go to the next image, that I became aware of in the same period of time when I'm a sociology professor, and so as part of my work in urban sociology, I was engaging with community partnerships in the city of Detroit, almost as soon as I began here in 2005. And in particular, I made a connection with an organization called Bridging Communities in Southwest Detroit, and my students were doing some work with them. And there's a woman named Marion Bloy, who was one of the founders, and at that time an executive director. I think she was the executive director, or at Bridging Communities. I got involved with work that they were doing around neighborhood planning in Southwest Detroit, and she said to me, "Well, you might really want to be involved with this thing called the Fort Visger partnership." Fort and Visger refers to two different streets in Visger and Fort Cross in the city of River Rouge. Actually, it's on the boundary of River Rouge and Ecorse. So this was an organization focused on this area in the near downriver and Southwest Detroit area. But as I eventually became a board member of this organization called Fort Visger CDC, and in part or largely because of this map, which is, as you can see, it's called the Downriver Delta Greenways map, which was a project of the Fort Visger CDC, which was initiated before I ever became involved with that organization. They had expressed this vision of these kind of connecting greenways that would link the downriver areas, of Wyandotte and Trenton, and all the way down to, I believe, Gibraltar or Flat Rock with Southwest Detroit and with Dearborn and other areas up the Rouge River. And I was really struck by this vision of this downriver delta and thinking about, Fort Visger represented these two streets, this crossing of streets. And this image really focused on the rivers and the importance of the rivers, the Detroit River, the Ecorse River or Ecorse Creek, and the Rouge River as this kind of downriver delta. And we really felt like this really struck me as a kind of a more sort of organic and forward-thinking vision of thinking about rivers as opposed to streets, because it was the rivers that really defined these areas in the first place. And this area, which we call the Downriver Delta area, was once known as Ecorse Township, was actually one sort of contiguous area, was later broken up into smaller cities and so on. So long story short, I became involved with this organization, and we changed our name to Downriver Delta CDC. And we actually ended up approaching Ed Begale at the University of Michigan-Dearborn about coming to one of our legislative breakfasts to listen to this vision that we were putting forward about, moving from brownfields to greenways is the terminology that we used. He said, "Well, you should probably come talk to me about this Rouge Gateway partnership. I think you might be someone that might want to be involved." And that really led to this initial conversation. You can go to the next slide. Between all these different partners that Ed was already connected with, and I had some partners that I was connected with through the community work in Southwest Detroit and the near downriver area. And there was this group of people, including, one of the people who's here today, who's Sam Lovall, who was the landscape architect and artist who had actually contributed to both of those maps that I just showed you, from the Rouge Gateway Partnership and the Downriver Delta Greenway Vision. And so Ed pulled together this meeting that had, Sam was there. It was the first time I ever met Sam, although I'd seen his name and heard his name many times. Lloyd Baldwin was there from Michigan Department of Transportation. You were there, Brian, and Nancy Darga from MotorCities National Heritage Area, people from Wayne County, a bunch of different people. And we started, talking about what can be done in this space, especially around the redevelopment of this bridge, as you mentioned. And Ed basically told me at that time, and I've repeated this many times, that he said that half of leadership is just getting different people in a room and get them talking and then keep them talking, right? And over time, if you keep them talking about what they want to get done, eventually things can and will happen. And so that's what we started to do. We started meeting basically every month, and we took this name for ourselves, which was the Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership, and we kind of made that into the acronym of the FROG Partnership. Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership. And we developed this vision early on. And I thought it was really interesting to look back on it now, having come as far as we have about 10 years later, to think about this vision that we had articulated at that point, celebrating the vitality of the Rouge River as a natural, economic and cultural resource for the region, interconnection of historical interpretation, bike and water trails, motor tours, at the site of the 4th Street Bridge. So we clearly saw the 4th Street Bridge site as a kind of a fulcrum point, a kind of a toehold on this industrialized riverfront. And we had this vision of all these things that could happen here in this area through this sort of portal of this Fort Rouge gateway. So if you go to the next image, it shows these partners. This was actually at the ribbon cutting in October, but we picked up new partners as over the years, but a lot of that core group is actually in this picture. So Lloyd is there in the center. Sam is there. UAW Local 600, who I should mention was a part of the discussion very, very early on, even though I don't know if they were represented in that very first meeting. They're certainly involved in our very early discussions. And I think even Marion, is Marion in that picture? No, she's not in that picture.
No, she's
but
not.
Gina Stewart, who is the president and CEO of what became the Downriver Delta CDC, is in that picture. So this is kind of the core group of the Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership, this conversation that's continued over time. So you can go ahead to the next picture. So, I mean, again, it was kind of fun to look back at what we envisioned at that time as being the projects that we might engage in as a Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership, the Interpretive Park at the base of the 4th Street Bridge, wildlife habitat and urban forest. We saw that as a kind of a possibility at that point. This has actually now come to pass at the Marathon Gardens on the Marathon Petroleum Corporation site, which was something that I believe helped to spur along through the conversations we initiated with Marathon. And there are other projects that we're still working on today, acquisition of Fordson Island, and of course the Rouge Water Trail is very much an ongoing project at this point. So you go ahead to the next slide. So getting into the development of the park and the interpretive signs at the park, there are several there, and I think we're going to touch on the other ones in the course of the presentation today. But the importance of the river here is something I really want to emphasize, thinking back to those early maps in the Rouge Gateway Partnership and the Downriver Delta vision, how these rivers really, define the region and they tie us together. And they also tie the past and the present and the future together. And I really like how in this interpretive sign about the history of the Rouge River, it shows, you see the arrows showing the progression from the sort of the indigenous history of this region through this industrialization, the colonization and industrialization of the Detroit region, and then of course the pollution of the river, and then with the growing awareness about the environmental costs of this pollution, the development of the Clean Water Act, and then moving towards a sense of sustainable industry. And what I really also like about this image is that last part of the circle is not complete yet, right? I mean, it really shows how the changes in the river are connected to changes in our society, especially in terms of the ways we think about our relationship to the land. And that's why I think it was really important when we did the ribbon cutting of the 4th Street Bridge Park, that we began with the land acknowledgement, acknowledging the indigenous history of this land and the indigenous habitation of this land. And I think closing that loop is really our next step in thinking about how we move back towards a sense of obligation and commitment to the land, a land ethic, as Aldo Leopold called it. And so I'm going to leave my part of the story there. I think I've taken up enough time for now. I'm going to sort of pass the baton.
Yeah.
To
no,
Sam.
thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And again, that is certainly a nutshell. Paul can wax poetic. You're also part of the Friends of the Rouge, which of course should be acknowledged for their stewardship of the Rouge River and their vision towards the supporting it long term and this connective tissue. And you mentioned the acknowledgement of indigenous lands, but we should also point out that a year before we cut the ribbon, we broke ground at the park, and that groundbreaking program ceremony was also a recognition of the 50th anniversary of the Rouge River being on fire. And you talk about the pollution and the progression. So the idea that this river has progressed in a way that is 50 years ago, it was on fire because of pollution and all the issues that were going on, to the point that it is, you see the habitation happening, you see the evidence of flourishing wildlife, you see activity and programming here. So the interpretation at this site is to tell the story of the Rouge River as it evolves. And like you said, the story is not over. The period is not at the end of that sentence. It keeps moving forward. And so we're proud to be part of that and just tell them a little bit of that note of the story. So thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for reminding me, Brian, that image of the Rouge River burning is actually on the sign there. You can sort of point it out. There aren't that many photographs that exist. I think it's down right here when you see the fire, In the central lower area is an image of the Rouge fire being extinguished. There aren't that many photographs that remain of that incident, but it was a catalytic event, just as the Fort Hunger March was in terms of the thinking of the community, or the body politic, if you will, about the relationship to the river in particular, but about the environment more broadly. And also, thank you for reminding me, I am also a board member of Friends of the Rouge. I was not a board member at Friends of the Rouge when this project began. I think that was something that also evolved through this project. But yes, the long-term commitment to the stewardship of the Rouge River and is also something which became knitted into this project at a very early stage, along with the labor history story.
Absolutely. Yeah, awesome. So thanks, Paul, for that sort of brief interpretation. Just giving you a taste of what's there at the park and what you can take in, because it's a broad story to be told, and we can't tell it all, but we are certainly endeavoring to dive in a little bit. You already gave me the setup here, so I'm going to introduce our next panelist, who's going to take it from here. Sam Lovall, who is currently working with Friends of Detroit River, but as Paul said, has really sort of been the godfather of all of this, shepherding us through many iterations. He's part of these early plans as a landscape architect and designer through different companies and organizations, but always with a passion and eye towards getting the job done. So Sam, this must be very gratifying to be able to talk about this and somewhat in the rearview mirror, saying that we've accomplished this major task. But I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how this all connects in this broader, again, natural resource connection, the blue and green waterways, and et cetera. So Sam Lovall.
Well, hey, thanks, Brian. And thanks for having me here today, as well as for the past 10 years or so as being involved with this really exciting project, working with all the group. Really, these are the people that own it, the stakeholders that have come together to offer their ideas, guide the design, and as it turns out, it's really, I think, a great success. As Paul mentioned, there's a lot of stories. There's several interpretive signs in the park. We'll talk a little bit about this Blueways and Greenways sign in a moment. Paul did touch on the fact that one of the important parts of this park is that it is at the crossroads. It's in the downriver delta area. Okay, it's in the crossroads of Blueways and Greenways, regional and local Blueways and Greenways here in Southwest Detroit. This interpretive sign on the left emphasizes our state showcase regional trail, the Iron Belt Trail from Ironwood in the Upper Peninsula next to Wisconsin, all the way to Belle Isle. Okay, we're looking at 2,000 miles of non-motorized trails. It's actually two separate trails, one for hiking. I think the red one is for biking, and then the blue strand is for hiking. But in essence, both of those strands pretty much offer both hiking and biking pretty much all along the way. It's great that Michigan has such a prominent trail, but there's a number of greenways here in the city of Detroit as well. This is right on the Downriver Link Greenway, right at the edge, the gateway to the Downriver Link Greenway that connects all of our downriver communities to Detroit. And of course, to the north is the new up and coming Joe Lowe's Trail that is just getting off the ground. So there's as well as a number of other Detroit greenways, which are schematically shown on this diagram on the right-hand side. And you can see the location where you are here. We are right in the gateway to both the downriver and all of the Detroit greenways, as well as the water trail that, of course, along the Rouge River, connecting to the Detroit River, which is tremendously important as well. Before we jump to that water trail, I want to mention that this connection that's being made through the Downriver Link Greenways is going through the heaviest industrialized area probably in the state, but certainly in Detroit, which is for nearly 100 years been a barrier to these downriver communities, to the city of Detroit. And now with this green corridor that's being punched through it, we're being reconnected. It's truly fantastic. And then of course with the water trails, that the Friends of the Rouge River are championing along the Rouge River, starting in Canton. We're looking at 27 miles that end up at Belanger Park on the Detroit River, and of course go right past our 4th Street Bridge Park, which a second phase will include a kayak launch right at this park. Go ahead, Brian. So knowing that the park itself does not really have enough space to do all of the interpretation, right across the street, across the intersection, I should say, there's going to be a new gateway feature for the Downriver Link Greenways. This is a rendering by the PEA group that is in charge of the design of that project. And this, of course, will have additional interpretive signs. You can see one just on the in the foreground in front of the gateway feature, while there'll be another one on the other side of the structure itself. So there's plenty of stories to be told all about this whole Oakwood Heights area, and of course all that's happening in the along the Downriver Link Greenway that will extend all the way to Flat Rock. So a lot going on there.
No, I mean, what's interesting about this, Sam, is we're going to be presumptuous and say, we don't think that this gateway feature goes in this specific location if we're not already developing the park right across the street from it. So this park sort of acts as that launcher and codifies the efforts of not just this, but as you mentioned, Marathon Gardens, who are our corporate neighbors right next to it as well. So this really sort of brings it all together. So the park is sort of the rug that ties the room together as far as connecting these pieces. I'm gonna be presumptuous and say that. You don't have to, I'll say it. Yeah,
that's great, Brian. Thanks for jumping in there. This site is actually right in the corner of the Marathon Gardens area, which is a huge endeavor being put forth by Marathon Petroleum Company, and is adding to that green corridor, not just the trail itself, but this green corridor that's penetrating through this industrialized area.
Sure. Okay.
So the stormwater at the park, this is another story. People have to understand the background a little bit, that how important stormwater management is to the Rouge River, where in years past it was much worse. A lot of work has been done to control what we know of as combined sewer overflow. This is where our area was initially built out with a combined storm and sanitary system that was sized for a much smaller community. So as our community grew and there was much more poor surfaces that cannot be penetrated by water, those areas contributed to the fact that every time it rained, the system overloaded and either backed up into homes and community buildings, or was released into the river in the way of combined sewer overflow. This is raw sewage going into the river, right? So stormwater management has been realized as one of the critical tools to solve that problem. Certainly a lot of infrastructure has been built over the last 20 years that has solved most of the problem, but we still have some issues with the combined sewer overflow. And by creating more porous areas, removing asphalt pavements, creating green roofs, all of that stormwater management goes toward slowing down the rain event so it does not end up overflowing into the river. This interpretive sign discusses the natural water cycle on the upper left corner and how that does allow water to penetrate the earth and clean itself as it moves toward the river. The urban water cycle, on the other hand, with all the non-porous surfaces, water runs right directly into the river very quickly. It's like the city taking a bath. It brings pollution into the river. It overflows the river. This very flashy condition actually causes a lot of erosion as well. So a lot of problems with that urban water cycle. And by creating porous pavements, which most of the park is, what little pavement there is in the park, almost all of it is porous pavement. When we have a demonstration in the park as well, showing how porous pavement allows that rainwater to penetrate, go beneath the soil, and slowly make its way to the river. And this sketch on the right-hand side is somewhat of a cutaway. It shows the terrace of the park at the top, and how water can penetrate through the pavement, through the ground, and clean itself as it makes its way to the river. And this you can see at the bottom, it says push the rain button to see the difference between urban runoff and infiltration. So right next to this interpretive sign, go ahead, Brian, is this rain button that you can see the stanchion there next to the interpretive sign. And if you press that for a few seconds, these frogs that sit along the terrace will spurt a little bit of water out, and you can see how the water will penetrate this porous pavement. In the center, there's a spurt that comes up and traverses along a concrete gutter, a non-porous surface, makes its way to a drain, and then it empties down and outlets into a rain garden. So this little spurt of water only happens for a few seconds, but it demonstrates this whole difference between the rural water cycle and the urban water cycle. So an active demonstration that goes right along with the panel. Also notice all of these interpretive signs are displayed on a element that was salvaged from the former Basque Bridge right here that crossed over the Rouge River, which is kind of exciting to be able to reuse. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the sculptural piece.
Yeah. Oh, this is, this is a fun element. And if you ask us if there was even a moment's hesitation when they asked us what sculpture could represent and be the sort of spurting feature, and they said, we've got figurines of a frog, we said, oh, no, say no more. Let's use the frogs, and the frogs represent that. The frogs represent sort of the evolution, the connection between land and water, the representation of vitality. So we're excited to see that there. And it does work quite well. If you follow it through here, there's a little spout that runs it off into this far away. You can see off in the distance, sort of this catch basin out in the distance. So that's all set up, by the way. You mentioned earlier, phase 2, for those who are following along, this sort of section back here would be the potential phase 2. So that's the perspective you'd be looking at, and it would all connect out to the river. So we're inching closer to that connection to the river. So thanks, Sam, for sort of setting that stage and putting it all in perspective as to why this space and this park would be so important to telling these stories, the Rouge River's history, the connection between the Greenways, and our connection and our obligation to responsible management and stewardship of these lands. So that's all connected and told here at the park. And you wouldn't immediately think about it when we talk about the main topic. But I would be remiss to say, as I kind of take it forward, that the reason that the Motor Cities National Heritage Area became involved with its mission of preserving and promoting automotive and labor history is because of the events of the 1932 Fort Hunger March. And this site, the original bridge that you see here in this interpretive sign, and even smaller on that, you can see the historic marker that marked and explained that element, the traditional state of Michigan green historic marker. When that bridge was being torn down and the marker itself was being removed, that entire story would have essentially disappeared from this space. So it was sort of an unconscionable loss to say that we can't have something there that tells the story. And so I'll go back to the Michigan Department of Transportation and saying they had the vision to say, well, this little plot of land that's next to the bridge that we're rebuilding could be a parking lot or just a field, but instead we might endeavor to turn it over to this community group and let you interpret it. And I want to attempt to, in this presentation, go into the intricacies of the impact of the Hunger March, except to say that it is one of the seminal moments in sort of the creation of what we consider the labor movement. It happened in 1932 when 3,000 or so unemployed workers gathered essentially at this bridge, mustered at this bridge to march towards the nearby Rouge plant with a list of demands that they thought Mr. Ford should meet. They were met with resistance by Dearborn police and Ford security, and dozens of people were injured and 5 people died that day marching. And it represented that need for better connection between community and industry that needed to move forward. And as we know the dates, in 1932, by 1935, the United Auto Workers had formally formed. And by 1941, a contract had been forged between UAW to represent them at Ford Motor Company. So from this moment, as you fast forward to the 1930s and those early parts of labor movement and strikes and such to 1941 signing that agreement, it really represented the pivot point in the turn of what was necessary there. But again, this deserves its own presentation, so I'm not going to say that that is it, but I want to give you that synopsis and also set the stage as to why we became involved and so interested in what would happen to it. To give you a bit of a happy ending real quick on this marker itself, the marker was taken from this this bridge, and a lot of the limestone here was also taken to be salvaged, which we'll show you in a minute. And the marker itself now is at the UAW Local 600 down the street, who represented the Ford Local for so many years. So the marker itself was put there. That was a special dispensation that was given by the state of Michigan, because normally the markers would have been destroyed. So we're happy to see that marker live on in a new life, representing the Hunger March as it originally was talked about here. And again, this interpretive sign is there to tell that story as well. But we tell the story through signs, and sort of there's an abstract to this because it happened so long ago. But what made it really close to home was this next slide and this picture here. When we first started the fundraising for the park, we were contacted almost immediately by this family. You can see the name tag there. The gentleman standing up is Joel Bustle. At the time we took this picture, he was 82 years old, I believe, and he is the nephew of one of the 5 people who was killed at the Hunger March, named Joe Bustle, one of the 5. And they reached out, and their motivation behind this was simply to support something that represented their family's history in such an intimate way. It's not about the politics behind it. It's not about any other issues. It really is about their family story and how it's been infamously linked to this event. And they wanted to give us something that was going to be so beneficial to the community that surrounded it. And in fact, this photo was taken at the Michigan Labor History Society's annual meeting, of which Mr. Bustle stood up and talked about our vision for the future should be a shared one, should be one where we learn from our past, but don't repeat it. And then we have a positive outlook moving forward. And even after 80 years of waiting for that moment, he was so happy to see what was going to happen with the park. And his daughter standing next to him is the woman who was featured earlier in the slide when we showed the ribbon cutting. She's the one that cut the ribbon. Joel was not able to be there because he was in ill health. And in fact, a few weeks after the ribbon cutting, she contacted us to let us know that he had passed away. And her story to us was that what he found solace in those later times was to know that the park had found completion and that the family's name had been put in such a positive light. And it really gave him a lot of joy as they shared photos, even of the ribbon cutting. So she really shared a personal story. And that's what the motivation is to us. Interpretation is about telling the story that even though history is history, we're interpreting and spinning that story in a way that makes it relatable to all of us. This is someone's family, and this is their story that we're endeavoring to share. And that's what the park is all about. It's sharing our collective community histories and what we own in this land, in this community, in these neighborhoods, and of course the story of the Hunger March and its impact. And with that, I'm going to move forward with the story. We talked about the bridge and the parts being salvaged, and I'm going to introduce the person who took those salvaged parts, which you would consider remnant scraps and throwaways, and crafted it into something so beautiful, which became the centerpiece of the park. And I might again go even further to say represented pulling all of these collective stories that we've already talked about, pulling it all together. So Erik Nordin is with us, and he is from Detroit Design Center. Erik, I'll let you explain a little bit about your company and some of the work that they may know you from, and then we'll start to walk through what you did to create the sculpture at the park.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Erik Nordin. My brother Israel and I created the sculpture for the park, and we've been working in Detroit now for about 20 years. Our studio is on Michigan Avenue, and we have a event space and showroom in Midtown Detroit. We're so proud to have, been part of this super talented and creative team, the people that are kind of talking with you today. Such a fantastic thing that's happened here with the park and all the different things that it represents. The sculptures that we create, we focus primarily on public sculpture, large scale pieces. We have we're getting close to 50 pieces in the state of Michigan, in many cities, in Detroit, and a lot of the local cities throughout Michigan. We just put this past year a new piece in Muskegon, as well as this piece here, and a new piece at Michigan State University, a large piece for their public art collection. We work with steel and glass primarily, and this piece was especially fun and challenging for a multitude of reasons. The story of this piece There's multiple things that we touched on. We express our pieces in a way that tell a story abstractly. And so taking, kind of these artifacts is what we'd call them, these pieces of history from the bridge and such cool architecture and, the way that the bridge was constructed, and the engineering that goes into it. And to take that and to take the artifacts, a lot of artists will call them found objects. We like to term them as artifacts because they're something that historically have value. And then to kind of express all the important things that this park represents, and that the changing of the environment, and the story of the Hunger March, and kind of meld all these things together into an abstract way that can talk about what these stories mean. So we've got a video we're going to play for you that kind of shows some of the things that that we did to get the piece put together. But what you're seeing now on the screen are some of the early pictures of the pieces that we picked up that were components of the original drawbridge. And the trussing and the gears that are in the art piece were extremely heavy and long. We actually had to use come back with a second crane. The first that we went with wasn't actually strong enough to pick these up. They were much bigger and heavier than we thought. I think the early picture showed us kind of there with one of the lifts picking up one of the trusses. But the pieces themselves are just so beautiful in architecture. The decision that we decided to go with was to kind of express them in a way, as you see in the art piece, you'll see in this video here, that the piece has kind of a natural patina to it, which we consider like an oxidized patina. But as we're going through the video here, I can kind of tell you a little bit about our process and what it took to put this piece together. Like I was saying, my brother and I have been working on pieces for, in the art field for 20 years. He went to the Center of Creative Studies. I went to the University of Michigan. You can see the truss getting picked up here, getting these back to our studio. That gear right there weighed over, I think, close to 6,000 pounds. In the piece, as we go along the video, you'll see the glass in the center of it that represented the changing of the river. This is both my brother Israel and my other brother Chris. And here we are kind of making the castings that went into the sculpture. We create custom molds, and then we pour molten glass into these molds and add color to them. And part of the story that we expressed in the art piece was the changing of the Rouge River from its kind of like term of being the Red River to now, back to where we can boat in it and kayak in it. And it's, the water has been, changed, to more of a clean, and, we're making headway with the environment. So you'll see in the art piece that the glass changes from red to blue. Here in this shot, you can see kind of a ladder walking down the middle of the two truss pieces, and that ladder represents the different. There were issues that the group was trying to solve with the Hunger March, and there were important points that they were looking to negotiate, and that ladder represents that. You'll see here as we're picking up the piece. My brother Israel, who's quite the master of heavy objects, he has the ability to kind of magically balance things like the ancient Egyptians did. He's a very talented engineer and a builder. We're picking the piece up here now with the crane to set it in place. We were joking the other day, we had a program, we did an interview on WDET about our videos like this, where you see nice calm music and everything looks really easy, but behind the scenes, it's actually quite a bit more intense because of the weight of the objects. Here you'll see the two trusses kind of reaching towards the sky. What we definitely wanted to do was incorporate and make people recognize the beauty of the architecture of the trussing and its original kind of like the engineering of it to hold up the bridge. The two trusses are reaching towards the sky, which represent, the group kind of leading themselves to a better place in life. What's important in our art pieces is to, bring people together and to kind of have a story that talks of unity, and that also talks of inspiring one another and working together to get to a better place. The gear sitting at top represents the industry, and the ladder is climbing to that industry. In the center of the ladder, you'll see the glass pieces set that go from red to blue. And that shows the changing of the environment, the changing of the Rouge, and the efforts that have gone to kind of clean the water and to work and clean up the environment. As they were talking earlier, it was mentioned, both Sam and Paul mentioned about this idea of changing, these brownways to greenways, and the water and everything that's so important to our environment was important to tell in this piece. But also, the fact that people can work together to get to a better place, and that we can hold our industry to a higher standard. And that's what we wanted to do with this piece, to kind of have these arms reaching out to one another, or reaching to the sky, to a better place, to have the industry, that gear in the center of that, representing, industry, and how we can hold that industry to a higher standard. And then within the ladder, there are a cluster of spheres that represent the people marching up that ladder, to the Rouge, and for their attempt at working to kind of negotiate these terms that they were hoping to achieve. Mostly, what we wanted to do is create something beautiful for the park that inspired conversation, that would get people like yourselves to ask questions about what the art piece means, and what it kind of represents. And, I can say that we're super proud, again, to have had the opportunity to make this piece. And we have some exciting pieces coming up this year. We're making the gateway sculpture for the Belle Isle, the Iron Bell Trail, that's going to be on Belle Isle, and that'll be going in this fall. It's one of the largest pieces to go on Belle Isle in decades, from what we understand. And we have several other, really cool pieces coming up this year as well. So again, so proud to have been part of this. And if we can answer any questions, please let me know.
Oh, yeah. And thank you, Erik. Again, modesty is there. I mean, you can imagine the work that went into this. We want to take a moment now to thank the Gordie Howe International Bridge Community Benefits Plan, which is the group that actually funded this sculpture. When we were building the park, we kept saying, well, there'll be a sculpture in the middle, and we'll get to it when we get to it, and then we'll cross that bridge, pardon the pun, when we get to it. And there came a moment where someone just built a new bridge for us and said, we'd like to support this project as something that supports the community, provided that you get community input, provided that you solicit them, provided that you have an artist who is familiar and grounded in our region. And when we found Erik in the Detroit Design Center, it was sort of a match made in heaven. I will say publicly that Erik was very patient with us. As you would imagine, as Paul talked about, is a huge group of people who all had varying inputs about how this thing could go. And he sat there and accepted all of our ingredients and made a delicious soup out of it. And so the beautiful sculpture that came out of it was all of our input and all of our thoughts about how it could go. And it basically stayed true to it. We have a quick question from the Q&A. Nathan asked, were these specific trusses structural from each drawbridge leaf, or were they the streetcar wire support towers from each side over the road? We don't have Lloyd Baldwin from MDOT, who's our historian in this. Sam, you might know what specific parts these were. I thought that these were the supports for the walkway.
These pieces here, if just looking at some of the historical photos, I believe are the supports for the electronic streetcars. Yeah, however those were electronically powered. And I mean, I'm not the expert on this, Lloyd is, but if I were to make a decision based on the historical images, these look exactly what was holding up those elements. So yeah, they don't hold up the bridge, but they hold up the electronic mechanisms for the streetcars. Yeah. Now, some of the other parts that were salvaged did hold up the sidewalk that was adjacent to the bridge. These some panels. Actually, it's shown in the lower left there, Brian. If you can, it's kind of dark. Yeah, that piece right there was used to hold up the Rouge and the Hunger March signs. There's two of them.
Right.
So theoretically, those held up the sidewalk on the side of the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, I think if nothing else, those images give you a perspective of scale of how big this stuff was. In the video, you saw them moving gears, and as Erik said, weighed several thousand pounds. That how huge these things were. That wasn't even close to the largest gear that we had available to us. So again, the Michigan Department of Transportation and working with Ford Motor Companies, particularly the Rouge plant, we're able to store those materials so that our artists could come along and utilize them and make something beautiful out of them. And we've mentioned Lloyd Baldwin, our MDOT historian. Again, kudos to him because he was the one that led the charge to make sure that this story was told. And when the materials were salvaged, he's the one that really stepped up to make sure that they were protected long enough to make what we made out of them and move things forward. So thanks to all who were involved in that section. And on the sculpture, especially as it was being installed, you could see as they were going in, it was still yet to be completed because at the base of both sides of the sculpture, there's a position for a plaque. I mean, the last bit of our interpretation we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to bring Paul back in to talk about this, is that we wanted to tell story, not just the interpretive signs that you see all around, but specifically on the sculpture and talk about what it represents. And again, how it sort of ties these themes together, both the labor and industrial history and the environmental and community history. So Paul wrote two beautiful pieces that we're going to step through here today. And Paul, you can talk about sort of the motivation behind these. These are what you're going to see are the two plaques that are on the base of each side of the sculpture. So Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, Erik and Israel were very willing to meet with us multiple times with the members of the community to look at different phases of the construction of the sculpture and the ideas. And we had a lot of back and forth conversation. We really wanted to make sure that these stories were sort of woven into the sculpture, that the sculpture sort of represented what the park was about, but at the same time that the sculpture tied the park together visually and was in scale with everything else in the park. But that kind of last phase, because the Nordins, they always include, an explanatory plaque with their work. We had this final discussion was sort of about what was the plaque going to say, and because we really had these kind of two major stories, this environmental story and this labor history story, and both are connected, to the story of industry and to the struggle with industry in many cases. In the past, the struggle between labor and industry, the struggle for better working conditions as represented by those 14 demands. And then in the present, actually, the environmental justice struggle, the struggle that's very much a part of Detroit in this area in particular, which is also a struggle between community and industry, which the vision of the park is that we're moving forward together and we're moving towards a better place in the future, as Erik said. So March On was a name that we had given to the events we started doing a couple years ago as fundraisers for the park. We did start doing them in March. So I think we'd be, on our 4th or 5th this year, where we're trying to figure out what the event is going to look like this year in the, in pandemic year. Last year we did the event in early March. It was right before everything shut down for the year, right? Our last March On event. And usually these have been music events combining music and spoken word, but really with a focus on the sort of spirit of struggle and how the spirit of struggle defines Detroit, especially, over the years. And this struggle has changed over time. Of course, this became even more meaningful in the last year with the marches for racial justice, that were, sweeping the land and Detroit included. And so we had this challenge, and this was before, those struggles, before, the protests over George Floyd occurred, and we started working on this narrative, and we decided to do it. You said earlier that I sometimes like to wax poetic, and so when we started to put together the narrative for the sculpture, we really decided to opt against just having a text explaining what the sculpture is about, because we have all these other interpretive signs in the park, as you saw, that are very factual and very detailed. We decided to do something that was a little more sort of poetic, almost more like a song, thinking about, the role of the march. And so I don't know if you probably may have read through the first part of the March On poem already. It was March of 1932. The depths of depression and thousands of souls, women and men, young and old, crossed the bridge and braved the cold to deliver a list of 14 demands to the Rouge plant just up the road. It was a bitter mile. Dozens were shot and 5 lost their lives. 9 years later, the Rouge was unionized. Wages began to rise. Because of their march, Detroiters got a better life. So we really wanted to also put the names of the marchers there for everyone to see and to be recorded for posterity. Joe Bussell, Joe de Blasio, Coleman Lenny, Curtis Williams, and Joe York. And this ensured that was there. But then there was this other part of the story too, if you want to show the other one, I can read this one quickly as well. in October of 1969, the oily water of the Rouge River caught fire. The light of that flame made it clear that something had to change. People marched to demand a cleaner environment, to reject pollution as the cost of prosperity. Because of those movements, those demands, those cries, we all got a better life. For air, for earth, for water, a decent wage, a safe workplace, for community, for equity, for justice, for recovery. Together we march on. So we felt like in the end, this was a kind of a fitting, title representing sort of the spirit of what the park is about, and also what the sculpture was saying, that the message that, the sort of the message in steel and glass that Erik and Israel had crafted for us. And so we hope you go to see and to read the words in that setting, because we feel like there's a power to looking at the sculpture there and being in that place and thinking about these stories coming together in this place that we can't replicate, in this environment. But hopefully this will encourage people to go and see and experience the park for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Paul. Again, these are beautifully crafted words that really capture the spirit of everything we were going for. So I think it's apropos that we ended on that. And what you said about going to support the park by visiting it, of course, it's really available all the time. I think officially we have to have some park hours that it's open during the spring and summer, closes in November, reopens again in April. But essentially, as we've shown, it's available in all angles. So
although the frogs are not functioning currently because they've been winterized, so you have to wait till April to go make the frogs.
Actually, yeah, they can follow an ice sculpture out of there.
They're hibernating. They're hibernating.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Yeah, but let me say this: to support the park, Paul has mentioned the Downriver Delta, and they've taken on the stewardship of this, as we all, Motor Cities and all of the folks we mentioned earlier, endeavored to build the park. That was just the end of our beginning, in that we endeavored to build the park, but now that we have it, it's up to all of us to support it and to preserve what we have there, to make sure that it is maintained properly. So Downriver Delta has taken on that charge. So I'm certain everyone here would love to support that. And again, these are a couple ways you can do that. You can mail your donation to the address you see on the screen, which I'm also putting in the chat. You can also use PayPal if you're adept at that. Simply look up Downriver Delta and the email address that you're going to see here in a second, and that is the way you can support it via PayPal. They are out there making sure that the grass is cut, that the snow is shoveled, that the sculptures are clean, that the signage is clear, that the that the trash is empty. So they are taking on all of that for all of us. So we want to continue to support them. And we do have a few questions before we go. First, a comment from Irma. It says the green infrastructure elements are wonderful. You have highlighted environmental protection and woven into it the personal elements that create a space that is welcoming and historically relevant. Very impressive. Thank you all. Thank you, Irma. But her question is, post-COVID, are there plans for specific events? So that's very, kind of far thinking, but I think for sure, Paul, that there are some thoughts about programming the space with events.
Yeah, so that's another piece of what the Downriver Delta is taking on. It's not just the sort of the maintenance of the park in terms of the landscape and the cleaning and picking up the garbage and things like that, but programming the park. So events, gatherings at the park. We would really like to see the park used for gatherings of all kinds, whether they're the spirit of free speech, right, is a part of the spirit of the park, and so it's a public space. There is electricity available. We would want you to contact the Downriver Delta to, if you're planning to do an event with electricity, so we can plan appropriately. But yes, we're hoping to incorporate the park into, the bicycle rides we do every year, the roll along the river rides, and then the march on events in the future. We'd like to be able to host events outside. Of course, this year we're still trying to figure out what to do. We may do a limited scale event at the park, weather permitting, around the anniversary of the Hunger March, and then do some live streaming from there. But absolutely, we're looking for, and we're open to all kinds of ideas for how the park might be activated and utilized.
Absolutely. Clay Thompson asked, can the park be recognized by any governmental or other organizations for the excellent work that has been done? It's remarkable, and the team did an outstanding job. So thank you, Clay. So the question really is, probably something that we're all noodling over is I think we'll be putting the good news out to a lot of folks, and there'll be some hardware coming all of our ways for the work on the park. So I'm sure there are a lot of organizations who recognize these great infrastructure projects and keep things flowing. And Sam and Paul, I know you operate in that sandbox quite a bit. So I think it's suffice to say that we'll probably be reaching out to some of those partners. And I think we all, again, want to thank that frog group who worked so hard, all the partners who went into it to make it happen, because it's their congratulations to be shared for sure. That it is a huge undertaking. Just people to come together and make things happen is important. You mentioned Ed earlier. Ed Bigale was part of our MotorCities board and supported us for years, and he would say those same sorts of things. And one of the other things he brought up to me all the time, Paul, was that the things that make us the same are greater than the things that make us different. So coming together on projects is probably the only way to make these things work and crossing lines. And I think we've done that with this. So very proud of everything that's happened with this, and glad to be able to share this today with those who joined us to learn more about the park and the interpretive elements of it, so what you can look forward to as you visit. I'll wrap it up with a great endorsement and comment from Cynthia Jones, who is the manager of the Ford Rouge factory tour on behalf of the Henry Ford, who says, great presentation. Look forward to encouraging my team members to watch the archive version and go with their ongoing training. So our vision is to make this part of an overall sort of conversation about that region and how all these things tie together. And the fact that the Rouge factory and the Rouge factory tour as a public facing element is right down the road from this is great encouragement to say this could be part of that discussion as well. So good stuff. So if
we welcome that conversation with Cynthia. So it was
absolutely
great to hear from her, and we love to talk about.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're just over our time, but I think it was a time well spent. We'd like to thank everybody who joined us here today. And for those who are looking forward to our next MotorCities at Home, MotorCities at Home number 12, stay tuned. We will be shooting something. We will be shooting something out. Dr. Ligabell, it is going to be online via YouTube in just a little while. So when we wrap this up, we'll upload it so you'll be able to see the whole presentation if you missed part of it live. So anyway, so we're going to wrap this up, and we'll thank everybody for joining us. And again, stay tuned for MotorCities at Home number 12, which will be announced very soon, and more activities down the road. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.